Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Good morning. Glad to see you all. Glad to continue our group exploration of the Maha Satipatthana Sutta. And I really do want to do that today. We're going to dive in. And in order to do that, I'd like to take a little minute and I'd like you all to consider and ponder something for yourselves, for your own inquiry. So I really do want to engage with this as a group today. And always I say that and I try to do that, but then it's really hard. There's a lot of words and I do a lot of talking. So I want you to engage just as we go through this today with the tough stuff. That's where we left off last week. We were talking about dukkha. We're talking about tough stuff. And what I'd like you to do, we're freshly practiced. We're sitting here, present moment at peace in a safe space. And I'd like you to take a minute and I'd like you to ponder what for you personally is your suffering. What is your dukkha? It's not the same for everybody because we come from different conditions. But if you stop and really look, see if you can look deeply, what is the thing that bothers you? What's bothering you maybe generally in life these days? Did you have a tough week? Do you have stuff going on? Have you been having some anxiety or difficulties lately? And I'm just asking you to ponder this so we can you can for yourself kind of note it. You could write it down. You could think about it, because as we enter today's discussion, I think you should look at that. I think that should be the tool that you use to examine these questions, because today is full of questions. Remember that we left off with questions that we had been talking about. What are the great questions in life? And this is one of them. So take 30 seconds still before I go on and just really think about, do you have a fear or anxiety or thing that really gets you differently? That's your thing. So we got to evaluate, figure out what hurts. It's like the story about the guy who went to the doctor and he said, boy, I can't figure out what's going on, because if I touch here, it hurts. 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 And so his doctor gave him a careful examination. He said, well, I think I found the problem. Your finger's broken. It hurts when you touch here, it hurts when you touch here, it hurts when you touch here. And sometimes it's like that. We have things bugging us and we don't really quite get to the root of what it is. So today, as we do this examination, we're going to be doing some kind of root examination. What do I mean by that? Let me give you another metaphor. Here's a question. Why does your car go down the road? What makes your car go down the road? Let's unpack that question just real quick as a way of looking at how we can examine this. So the first answer might be your wheels turn, right? Wheels turn, car goes. But if we back off of that a little bit and examine a little deeper, we say, well, actually, the axle is what's turning the wheels. And that's turning because something else is turning. And that's turning because the engine pistons are firing. So as you back up, well, the car is going down the road because the engine pistons are firing. But that's not exactly accurate, because the engine pistons don't fire unless there's fuel and air and spark. So that the three things have to go to create a combustion so that the pistons move, so that the wheels turn. So you could say, well, it's because fuel burns, because there's gasoline in the engine and it's catching fire. And that's what it is. That's why the car goes down the road. But that's not even accurate, because the gas pedal has to be pressed to inject the gas into the engine so that it catches fire, so that the wheels turns, the car goes down the road. So the true answer can't be that it's the engine or that it's the gas pedal. Something's pressing the gas pedal. So the answer has to be your car goes down the road because you press the gas pedal. But even that's not a perfect answer, Because why did you press the gas pedal? Why did you get in the car? Why did you want to go someplace? So the deeper answer is you wanted to go someplace. That's why the car goes down the road. Why did you want to go someplace? There was a reason for that. So as we unpack this, we're we're looking at something, we're saying, oh, there's the thing, but we back off a little bit. And that's what the Buddha's been doing. He's looking for what is the root cause of that suffering, of your dukkha. So if you have a question in mind, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and share the presentation for this week, and we'll start taking a look at some questions. Remember, these are kind of what we left off with. Last week, we were talking about how there's big existential questions, like what's the meaning of life? And then there are intrinsic experience questions, like how do I get what I want? So when you look at your dukkha that you're examining, can you see that there is some question behind that? Does that make sense? Is there something else there, like the example of the car, that as we back off and really think about that a minute? Because the Buddha said that this is not that out of all these questions, there's a root to this, and it's dukkha. It's that we're asking questions, and the noble question to look at is, why do we struggle? Why is there all this discomfort and pain in life? What is the tough stuff about? How can we do something about that? And this is the root of the Four Noble Truths, is this concept that we all experience difficulty, pain, and discomfort, that we all have this innate sense of something's not quite right. And so he says, what is the root of dukkha? Why does this car go down the road? Has to be the noble question, because all the other questions really fit into this one. Is like, why do we suffer? And remember, we stuck with the word dukkha last week, because just even suffering isn't exactly a perfect definition. There's that something makes the car go down the road sense. Does this make sense so far? Everybody kind of with me on this? Following? So today we're going to talk about the second and third noble truths, truths worth examining. And that's the noble truth of the origin of suffering and the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, getting to the root of why do we experience these things. So pondering that bit of stress that we started talking about at the top, and the deep question, there's often, when I examine my deep questions, there's often this sense like of fear that I don't even want to look at them, that I'm doing a lot of things to just even kind of avoid looking at the question, the big question, the stuff that I'm most scared of. And so then there's this other one arises here, another question, that is, if there is this suffering and I can find its root, is it possible for it to stop? Is it possible for that thing that you looked at the top of the conversation that bugs you, is it possible for that to just cease? And so it brings me to what I think is the biggest question in all of Buddhism, which is it so? I think it drove the Buddha. I think the questions that drove Siddhartha were, is it so? And then what? Like, so is it so that this is true? And if I come to a point in life where I see that, then what happens? Like, those two simple questions drive us to seeking these other big answers. So today we're going to look at what the Buddha says is the noble truth of how suffering comes about. And we're going to look at, is it possible for it to cease? That's a big question. That's why we're here. And so as you go through this, take the thing that you are pondering and apply the question, is it so? Is what the Buddha says about these things accurate to your suffering. So with that, I am for a moment going to stop sharing my screen there, and we'll take a look at our sutta for today. And we recall that we left off, this is Dukkha. We left off on Dukkha. We talked about birth, aging, and death, things coming into being, decaying, and struggling, and then dying is Dukkha. That sorrow, lamentation, pain, and distress in relation to those things is Dukkha. And being associated with things you don't want and being separated from things that you do want, those are all roots of this stress that we call Dukkha. And so today we move on to this noble truth of the origin of stress. And what is this noble truth of origination of stress? The craving that makes for further becoming, accompanied by passion and delight, relishing now here, now there, craving for sensuality, craving for becoming, craving for not becoming. And where does this craving when arising arise, and where when dwelling does it dwell? Whatever seems endearing and agreeable in the world, in terms of the world, that is where craving, when it arises, arises. And that is where when it dwelling, it dwells. And what seems enduring and agreeable in terms of the world? The eye seems enduring and agreeable to the world. That is where craving, when arising, arises. That is where, when dwelling, it dwells. The ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the intellect. Remember that we talk about how this is an oral tradition. And so these ellipses indicate that the chant or the original sutta would repeat this. It would say, and where does craving arise when arising? And where does it dwell when it dwells? It arrives and dwells in the ear. It arrives and dwells in the nose. It dwells in the tongue. And as you can see, we go on examining where it arises. And then similarly, he says, and what is the noble truth of the cessation of stress? The remainderless fading in cessation, renunciation, relinquishment, release, and letting go of that very craving. And where, when being abandoned, is this craving abandoned? And where, when ceasing, does it cease? Whatever seems endearing and agreeable in terms of the world, that is where, when being abandoned, this craving is abandoned. That is where, when ceasing, it ceases. And again, we go on to say, with the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind. And so, as I've done in weeks past, I broke this down so we could take a little deeper look at it onto the PowerPoint presentation here. So let's take a closer look at these noble truths. The root of these noble truths is the word Tanha. This is the word of the week. So last week's word was Dukkha, and we talked about that. And the root, according to the Buddha, of these problems is Tanha. The word Tanha originates from the Pali language, closely related to the Sanskrit word sarna, both of which derive from Proto-Indo-European root, meaning to dry or thirst. Hence, Tanha conveys the sense of thirsting for pleasures, existence, or cessation, highlighting a deep-seated and parching desire that perpetuates attachment and suffering. So, a lot of these words we've seen are combinations of other words. The etymology is interesting, but not Tanha, not this time. What does the Buddha say is the root of your suffering? Thirst. It's a perfect translation. Thirst is the root of suffering. Thirst for good experiences. Thirst for pleasures, physical and mental pleasures. And thirst to not have things that we don't want to have happen. That the thirst itself is the thing. Why does your car go down the road? Because you need to get to the store and buy something because you're thirsty. So it creates a whole motivation to go do something, to go look at it, to go chase it, to find something. The Buddha says Tanha is the root of your suffering. So the noble truth of the origin of suffering. And what is the noble truth of the origination of stress? Dukkha, the thirst that makes for further becoming, accompanied by passion and delight, relishing now here and now there. Let's stop and think about that for a second. Why do we thirst? What is it that we want out of this deal? Let's go back to your Dukkha. Would you say that at the root of your dukkha, there is tanha? That is thirst, a craving for it to be different, either to get what you want, to have the thing not happen, or simply the pleasurable experience itself driving you to gain it. Let's think about that a little bit. Let's use a couple of examples. You're in a relationship and you love someone, and you love them deeply, and your heart is full of love. And you see that person and you want to be with them, and you desire badly to be with them physically and mentally. You want them to be part of your space. At its root, that love is in and of itself, doesn't it kind of have a wanting? I want to be appreciated. I want to engage with this person in this way. I want it to reciprocate. I want to feel the sensation of love when I'm loving on them, when I'm being sweet to them, or I'm having even just a nice conversation with the person I love, and I'm having that pleasant experience. Can we see that at its root, there's a thing there that we thirst for in that love? I don't want to die. I don't want to grow old and die. I don't want to, I'm enjoying my life. I, growing old sucks. All the things that you used to like to do, you can do a little less, you ache a little more, and then the things that you wanted, they start to fall away. I don't want to do that. I don't want to experience that. I don't want to get to that point. I want that future to not exist. There's a lot of things that we can unpack like this. We can start to look at our fears in that way. But I think that this point, that there is underlying those things, a thirst, is worth, is noble and arya and worth stopping and hesitating. When we look at the dukkha, when we look at the thirst, is it simple enough to say we are thirsty? Or can we even step a little further back, like the car analogy, and say, there is something that creates in us a sense that we ought to be thirsty, that it ought to go this way. So when you look at your dukkha, is there a sense that it ought to go away, or you'd rather it didn't go that way, or something that's just really grabs your attention and captivates your mind and your body? Thirst for sensuality, thirst for becoming, thirst for non-becoming. And where does this thirst when arising arise? And where, when dwelling, does it dwell? Whatever seems endearing and agreeable in the terms of the world, that is where this thirst when arising arises. That is where when dwelling it dwells. The other translation I've heard of this says, where anything is desirable and agreeable. So this is a bit of a tough one. See the happy picture that I picked for this. You're getting what you want in life. The good stuff, right? The dukkha is the thing. We said dukkha is the problem. But here's the tough one. That's actually not what he's saying. He says delighting in the good stuff causes the thirst. Say that again. Delighting in the good stuff causes the thirst. We look at the tough stuff. We say, this is tough, and I don't want to do this. Or, I'd rather do something I like. I really like the good stuff. I only want to fill my life with the good stuff. That in and of itself, that craving. I only want to fill my life with good stuff. I don't want to do the bad stuff. That is a thirst. It drives so much of what we do. And it happens right where we enjoy stuff, right where we like it. So is it true that the Buddha's saying that, yeah, fundamentally, it's because you like it? And what seems enduring and agreeable in terms of the world? The I seems enduring and agreeable in terms of the world. That is where this thirst, when arising, arises. That is where, when dwelling, it dwells. When I see something and I say, I like that. That's a pretty picture. That's engaging. When I see and delight in it, there's a moment that happens. Now, remember, we're using our 4 foundations to see this. So we see it arising in the body. We see it arising in the mind, and in the things the mind does. We see it arising in our feelings. Where do we see that? We see it when we make contact with it. Like the example I gave weeks ago with the coffee cup. You see the coffee cup, you like the coffee cup, we engage with that, delight arises. I like that. I delight in it. I want more of it. How do I get more of it? I see something and I don't like it. And I find an aversion to it. And I want to push it away. And I say, I don't like that. I want rid of that. And dukkha arises. So right there at the arising of the thing, right when it meets my eye, when it meets my senses, when my consciousness arises, when I make contact with it, when I have a feeling, right when I have the feeling, right when I perceive the thing, right when I realize I have some kind of intention to get in my car and go someplace, that's when I can prevent the car from going forward. That's when I can see the thirst. That's when the thoughts come in and start to try to play a game with it. And that's when I spend my time evaluating. That's when the thing arises. That's where it dwells. So go back to your dukkha, the thing we started with, the thing that bugs you. Can you see this in that? Can you see that it rises where it makes contact? 4 foundations of mindfulness. Can you see the dukkha, the suffering arise from clinging or aversion to something that you have contact with? And this is that text again, just for the sake of being clear, just elaborated on in a big way. So he says, what's endearing and agreeable in terms of the world? And then he goes on to say the eye, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the intellect. When those things, that's where this arises. And it arises from contact with forms, sounds, smells, tastes, sensations. It arises from things I see, things I hear, things I smell, things that touch my tongue, my body, and my intellect. It's from the contact of those things. Feeling born from the contact. So I see it, and then I have a feeling. A perception of those things, of sounds, smells, and tastes, ideas about them. Intentions. This is a good one. That's a bad one. I want that one. I don't want this one. Thirst. Wanting those things at the root of this suffering. And then thoughts directed, all the thoughts, all the thinking. We start with monkey mind in our meditation. And why? Because our mind is running around in circles trying to find how we can find forms and sounds and smells and tastes and touches and ideas that we like, because we only want to have those ones. We don't want to have the bad ones. That's where things are, is when anything in the world seems endearing, anything we like is a good place to look for this to arise. So now what's this? And this is the big one, right? What is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering? Here it is in orange. We've read through all these suttas. We've done through all this stuff. And that line is where the Buddha says what is true. And what is the noble truth of the cessation of stress? The remainderless fading and cessation, renunciation, relinquishment, release, and letting go of that craving. And I highlighted that on purpose. Notice those are all action words. Those are all things that are active. It fades away. It ceases because you have renounced, because you have let go, because you have released that craving. So that's a thing that you're engaging with. And where, when being abandoned, is this craving abandoned? And where, when ceasing, does it cease? Whatever seems endearing and agreeable in terms of the world, that is where, when abandoning, this craving is abandoned. And that is where, when ceasing, it ceases. So at that moment of contact, when you see the thing arise, you have a moment where you can cling or not cling. Now, he doesn't say here, you never experience old age and death and suffering. Old age and death and suffering are part of the deal. They're going to come along. He's saying we don't cling to those things and we don't push them away. We see them as they are. We understand that they're part of it, but we don't chase them. We're okay with things having come and gone. And as we become more familiar with what's happening in the present moment, it becomes easier to say, I'm not going to chase that. I don't have to go anywhere in my car today. And we're back. And just like in the second noble truth in the text, and what seems enduring and agreeable in terms of the world? The I seems enduring and agreeable in terms of the world. That is where, when being abandoned, this craving is abandoned. That is where, when ceasing, it ceases. So it arises in your senses, and it ceases in your senses. It arises in your consciousness, and it ceases in your consciousness. It's abandoned in contact. It's abandoned in feeling. You've renounced it in perception. You've renounced it with your intentions. That is where, when being abandoned, this craving is abandoned. That is where, when ceasing, it ceases. This is called the noble truth of the cessation of stress. Now, I want to stop there for a second. But stop my screen share and get some conversation going. This is the thing. This is the promise. This is the third noble truth. Like, we look at the suffering, we struggle with dukkha, we struggle with tanha, we're trying to understand these things, we're trying to figure out what it is, how to be the best humans we can, answer those big existential questions. And in the third noble truth, he says there's an answer. Just pause there for a minute, take that in. What if there was no answer? What if we were just saying, no, you're just going to suffer, and you're going to be confused, and you're just going to struggle, and you're just going to be miserable the whole time. You're going to have stuff happen that's miserable, and you just got to get used to that and not want things to be good and not have pleasurable experiences. Don't do that. Don't have any good experiences, because they might make you want to have more good experiences, so you shouldn't do that. That is not what he's saying. There's a different promise in the third noble truth. There's a promise that there's a state of being that is beyond that thirst. What would that be like? Go back to your dukkha that we started this conversation. What would it be like if that thirst was not there? Is it possible? Is it so that that thirst for you is arising in a place where it meets one of those senses, one of those four foundations? Your mind, your physical body, your feelings, your thoughts. Is that where it's arising? Now, we saw through our practice of the four foundations that all those things arise and they come and go. They don't, remember, we observe them. We see that we stay present to the present moment, observe them as they are, and we realize that those thoughts, those feelings, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness, all the things that happen in the body are as fleeting as daylight, come and go. And he asked us, as we recognize that that's true, that all of those things that we have as part of our experience, that we can see that they arise, that negative states can be abandoned, and that there's not really any reason to cling to a thought or feeling. So coming back to your dukkha, if that's true, and we can see that it's fleeting, what would it be like to exist without it? Can you imagine? Can you imagine the ceaseless fading away of that fear, anxiety, stress in a way that it doesn't happen anymore? Because that's the promise of the third noble truth. The dukkha of life is part of existing in time and space. And the Buddha experienced it just as sure as you did, because he talks about these experiences, and he went on through his life. He taught for years, died of food poisoning. It talks about the suffering at the end of his life of being sick. So he didn't avoid that either. And yet, someplace in himself, he existed in a way where it didn't arise. And that's the promise of the third noble truth. What an amazing and mystical promise. Like, we can talk about, afterlife. Maybe there's a heaven and all the things that you want are gloriously available there. You finally get all these things that you crave. That's one promise. But imagine if you had heaven right now because you didn't have it. That's the promise of this, is that in this very moment, it's impossible to exist without the fear and anxiety and the stress, that can be true. Can you imagine? So he says there's three types of this. It's at the very top of what we just read. And when I talked to Ajahn Brian yesterday, he said, and I said, hey, is there anything that you would have me specifically talk about with Tanha? And he said, yeah. He said, I would talk about these three things. He said, he describes three places where this craving, where this thirst arises. Craving for sensory pleasures. This type of craving relates to desires and pleasures derived from the five senses. So I'm really looking forward to going out to a nice dinner. We're going to go to a fancy restaurant. It's going to be delicious. The environment's going to be great. I can't wait. The company's going to be good. That will be a wonderful experience. Or the things that leap to mind, sexual experiences, right? Enjoyable, fun time experiences. I want to be sitting here and comfortable. I don't want to be achy and ill. And sometimes I am. So that brings us to Bhava Tanha, craving for existence or becoming. It encompasses desires related to continued existence, rebirth, or the attainment of particular states of being in this life or future lives. I want to be rich. I want to make a bunch of money. I want to be able to buy anything I want. I want to have a yacht and an airplane and all sorts of good stuff that I can eat and do and a beautiful house. I want to be rich. I want to experience the life of a rich person. Or maybe I identify that lifestyle as not what I want. Man, I'm rich and now I got all these responsibilities and all this stuff I got to take care of and all these things I want to do. Wouldn't it be nice if I could just go live with the monks on an island someplace and not experience this stressful life of what it takes to be a winning capitalist? So I have the Baha Tanha, the Bhava Tanha, sorry, craving for non-existence. I don't want to exist like that. I get a diagnosis of cancer. Oh man, I don't want to go through chemotherapy. That sounds terrible. I don't want to exist like that. I don't want to die. I don't want to not exist. Oh, when I die, I want to go to heaven. I want to have a good existence. So we can point right to all of the different ways that we run around and chase good existence, not bad existence, or just at least getting all the good stuff that makes me feel better. Tanha. Sometimes we do this just in simple ways, like you ever get to a habit of where, man, I got to drive through that Starbucks every day because if I don't get my coffee in the morning, I'm cranky. Right there. That's a type of pleasurable thing that we might want to have that changes us. And if we don't, it creates suffering. So this thing of tanha, this craving, this thirst, this drive, this thing at a root, that is the thing that the Buddha says is the root of all of this suffering, and that it can be extinguished and relinquished and let go. So how can we quench that thirst? What can we do about that? And it brings me right back to your question that I hope you have sat with. How can I quench that thirst? And what is the noble truth of the path of practice leading to the cessation of stress? Just this very noble eightfold path: right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And that is the teaser for next week, because our final section in the Maha Satipatthana Sutta is an examination of the eightfold path, or the Buddha's recommendations on how you can live your life and reduce your clinging, your thirst, your stress, and live a happier life. And that's what I have for today. Tanha. So hopefully this has prompted some inner inquiry. Look in a little bit. Can we talk about thirst? And maybe that thing, it's kind of like the little bit of sand that gets inside an oyster's shell, right? You have your own sand and you're going to work on that. And an oyster covers it to try to make things better. It needs to not feel the grit of the sand. So it covers it, and eventually that becomes a pearl. So what's your pearl? What's the thing that you've been working on? And you don't have to say out loud, because you know what? To ask someone, what's the core thing that is the root of your suffering is a very personal question. But I'd like you to examine it. And if you have thoughts to share with the group about what you see there, then that would be appreciated. And with that, I'll open it up to group discussion. Tanha. Anybody got anything they'd like to, anything that struck you about today's talk? The sound of silent pondering. Nobody wants to jump in.
Ponderous.
Yes. Well, it's tough. This is a lot to work through. So it always makes for interesting group discussion. But
well, this being the main thing, it's like we touch on this like every week, really. Mm-hmm. And even doing, like the deep dive that we've been doing, if I've been saying, still, I don't know. It's hard to articulate, I guess.
Yeah.
Is probably what I'm thinking.
Chris?
What struck me in listening to the talk, so I was actually sitting next to Linda for most of the talk, because my Dukkha in the chair I'm sitting in right now is not great, so I wanted to sit someplace a little more comfortable. But to me, what's interesting is, and I see this, it came up in my thought while listening to the conversation, but it is a thing I've encountered a lot just in conversations with others, which is how much when you think about like the path to the cessation of suffering, how much of our identity is wrapped up, perhaps like your pearl analogy, how much of our identity, like how we orient and recognize ourselves, is also wrapped up in a particular flavor of the suffering, right? And so and by that, the desires, right, the cocktail of desires that we say, this is Chris, I want a Chris thing, and I'm going to do the Chris thing, and then I encounter the Dukkha, the not Chris thing, and I'm confronting this, and the not Chris thing is really uncomfortable, and maybe it might even thwart my Chris ambitions, right? And in fact, one of the things to consider is, what if Chris wasn't involved in this experience at all?
Yeah.
And then the whole thing starts to unravel, right? It's like, if I didn't care about this, it wouldn't be a problem. Or like,
could it be that Chris or Vicky or Wayne or any one of you, Linda, Victor, could it be that which you call Chris is actually a set of ideas of things Chris wants and likes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was, what is it? The line in it was a line at towards the end of the first Men in Black movie when they're confronting the cockroach monster, and he says, "There wouldn't be a problem if you weren't a problem."
Right.
Right. Or something like that.
And similarly, I think of this. This is the third noble truth is kind of like the guy who goes to the doctor and says, "Doctor, it hurts when I do this." And the doctor says, well, then don't do that.
Quit doing that.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. So that's really it. This is really a prescription. It's like, it hurts when I crave. Well, then stop craving. That's kind of a tall order. That's kind of a,
It's a tall order, but it's like, but wait, my entire life is oriented around certain craving certain things,
but
right?
I do think he points to that it ceases as soon as you realize that there's no real function to that craving, that the
Right.
craving in and of itself is the thing that's creating question. And so it's not really, that's why he doesn't say, he says cessation, abandonment, relinquishment, active things. He doesn't say it stops existing in the universe. He says you relinquish the craving.
Right.
Yeah.
And the thing that's there, well, this is kind of interesting. The thing that's there, that thing, right, that you will interpret as dukkha, that thing that's there, it never goes away, right? So, in our physical form, we get sick, we die. This is an experience we're all going to have, right? We're not going to be liberated from that experience, but we will be liberated from the suffering that the awareness of that experience brings by, acknowledging, that's the thing. That's just the thing, right? Doesn't say anything good or bad about me. It doesn't say anything good or bad about the nature of the universe. I can see things. If I see things as they are clearly, kind of wake up to that, then everything presents itself as it is, and it stops being, a Chris thing, for instance.
An idea of how you'd like it to be in the future.
How I'd like to be versus how it is, how it isn't, and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. So that's definitely it. And so, yeah, I mean, we're getting, this is the thing. Today's thing is the Buddha's thing, right? You can talk about dukkha, you got the idea, but the thing is, it's possible to relinquish this. That question that I asked, where I was like, you're suffering, what would it be like to have a world where that does not exist? Like, can you get a sense of what that might be like? And then that's closer to nibbana, right? Nibbana is the fading away of this suffering and coming from the fading away of this clinging. So you can maybe see it for yourself. If you just look, it's like, wow, if I wasn't so thirsty, if my thirst was quenched, what would that be like?
Well, it's interesting also. It's a, and I think this will lead into the eightfold path, right? How do you quench the thirst?
Right.
Right. What's the way? Like, okay, so I have this experience, and I have a thirst. How do I address the thirst? Do I just will it away, or do I quench it correctly? Is there a way to quench it so I can satisfy the core needs of the thirst? I think about this when I was breaking my habit for my love of soda pop. Right? I mean, this is just not about anything about enlightenment. This is just simply an idea that came to mind just now as I was thinking about it. I used to be this huge fiend of Coca-Cola, right? I would just drink it. I was drinking like it was going out of style. And I remember one day sitting down and deciding, I knew this was poison to me. And I was like, I need to figure out how to stop my relationship to this poison. And so I sat down with a bottle of the premium Mexican Coca-Cola, which is the finest Coca-Cola ever made. And I remember just slowly taking drinks and thinking about what was it about this that I was really drawn to? What was it that told me that this is a good thing I wanted to do, and why did I crave it? And I began to break down, like, what was I looking for? And I was like, oh, well, I am looking for water, right? I was thirsty, one. But I also liked the way it had a certain mouthfeel to it. And in my awareness, I was also aware of the fact that I liked the mouthfeel more than like the flavor. The flavor itself just was like sweet and and so I found I could actually satisfy the thirst, the physical need my body was wanting, by just using like mineral water. Once I recognized what it was that it was stimulating the thing, and so I could make some choices in that regard and have a healthier option, right? That's kind of, and again, this is not like, hey, I'm going to wake up and suddenly get it. It's like, wow, yeah.
Perfect example of enlightenment. Like,
Right.
I mean, I think that's a perfect example. Ben's coming. I see Ben joining us.
Yeah.
But it's a perfect example because we don't actually really think of it that way. We think of it like there's some big, more mystic, where we start with the big questions, meaning of life, the universe, and everything, not the meaning of why can I not go get a Coca-Cola after work? Why do I have to have that? Or I don't feel good.
Right.
And you're right, because examining it and seeing how the problem arose, what was actually happening, and the way you did that was with your 4 foundations of mindfulness. You saw the physical experience, you saw the emotional experience, you saw the mental experience, and you saw the different clinging and wanting and arising of stuff until you saw the factor of enlightenment. I don't want to be sick. I don't want to, drink
Right.
this stuff that I know is poison, arise. And that's all old news, right? It all came and went. It's not something that's happening to you right now.
Right. Yeah.
Yet you're not running away from here to go get a Coca-Cola.
No. No, in fact, I would be more likely to run away and grab a bottle of sparkling water. But
Right. So, but there it is. So you've created
yeah.
a new path. You found a new way. You said, "Oh, the right view is Coca-Cola is bad for me, and the right things for me to do about that are avoid it and find something else to do instead." And that is perfect segue for next week's talk on the Eightfold Path.
And Ben has joined us.
Yes, Ben has joined us. Just saying hello to Ben. Hey there,
Hey,
Ben.
Ben.
We see you. So
Ben.
glad to see you here with us. Um,
See him.
Anybody else? Vicky, you got something else? You got what? You've got that good look of ponder on your face. What do you
I'm
think?
pondering because I'm pondering.
Yes.
I, I feel mhm. When I looked at my dukkha, I picked a dukkha.
Hmm.
I recognize that as something that I was working or I wanted to be or argued with. I want aversion to, right? And then as we were talking, I looked, well, then what is it I thirst for? Is it the absence of that? Or am I thirsting for the opposite of that?
Would you agree there's thirst there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that took a while to come to. Yes. Yes. So that's where I am.
Perfect.
For now.
And you note it, and you practice with it, and you see where it arises, and you untangle. Anybody else? Victor, your microphone's on.
I was thinking of just the other way of the thirst in the present moment. That often, the eye will see something. I'll see myself, on the Zoom and see bald head, and I'm just aging and aging. And so a lot of the stuff that I don't want to happen hits me in the moment, and it's not like a monkey mind or anything, just ideas after ideas, but it sometimes is a thirst and a suffering. And I see, things change. We had dinner with our daughters, and they're doing all right, and actually they're doing all right without us.
Yeah.
And so, things kind of change, and that happens not just in the long run, but in just the instant that you'll see something, or you're not as articulate as you used to be, or your hands and your skin are kind of a little wrinkly or something, and that thirst arises, that suffering arises just in a micro moment, and it's hard to move on from that at times. Oh.
Yeah. And I find that there's a lot of subtlety and nuance to these things as you start really examining. And the thing is, your dukkha is yours. It comes from your conditions and the things that you have learned, the memories that you've had of both good and bad and indifferent. And I want more of this, and I don't want that. And I learned that this is the right way to do it, and that's the wrong way to do it. And that's your own batch of stuff. And that's why people, that's why there's so much variation. But at its root, we all have that same experience. We all do engage with dukkha and tanha. And yeah, I would say that I've had the experience, I can say, of seeing something arise and going, oh no, here's this ill will arising in me. And being like, yeah, I don't want to be a guy who's of ill will. And I can feel like a sense now of like that ill will where it used to just drive me. Maybe I get a sense of it and I go, oh yeah, I don't want to be driven by ill will, and I relinquish it and it goes away and the ill will stops. And I can fill the space of ill will. Often if I'm mad at somebody, I can fill that space with loving kindness for that person instead. So you can transmute it, you can turn it around. And that's part of this promise. But you can't really do that unless you can see it.
Right.
I can't say, I'm thirsty. I'm actually, I'm talking about thirst, genuine. Gosh, I'm thirsty. I'm at work. I don't have time right now, but boy, I'm parched. I could really use a drink of water. But I'm not going to I'm in the middle of a business meeting. I'm not going to let that drive the meeting. Hey, I have to stop everything and go do that. I can wait. I can catch that thirst and say, the future is going to change. The meeting's going to be over. I'm going to go get a drink of water. And just like that, there is a space to sit and say, I see this thing. I know that I can exist without it. I know that things shift and change. Then observing it, I can watch it arise. I can watch it exist. I can watch it pass away.
Yeah.
And that is the superpower of the Buddha. Anything else, Wayne? You got a big smile. You're the only one who hasn't said anything. You got anything you'd like to add?
No, I'm just sitting listening.
Okay.
This was kind of a ponderous discussion, wasn't it? Just really not something you can really verbalize right away, I think.
Well, as we've been going through the Four Noble Truths, it's kind of like that. And I kind of, as I presented it, I've known, you know what? If I was presenting this and you were just listening to me and saying, yes, I agree or disagree, and then going on with your life, you wouldn't be getting anything out of this. So it requires that you carefully dissect these concepts for yourself on your own dukkha. And so it's going to result in pondering. That's the nature of what we do here. Anything else before I conclude for today?
Just a question on learning. Last week's session is not up on YouTube that I'm finding. Is that correct?
Yep, I got it all. It takes a little bit to get it edited, put together, and uploaded. So I should get that done today.
Okay, I don't mean to push. I just
nope,
wanted to
not-
make
not at
sure
all.
I didn't miss, because I went looking because and I think I'm gonna go looking again for this one.
Good.
Just so I can go over it again.
Yeah, that's the deal. And I appreciate you doing that, and I hope that it's helpful. I really do.
It is for me.
Good.
Thank you.
And,
Yes.
and I do hope that this exploration does for you guys what it's done for me. I'm not claiming to be some super happy person who goes around without any struggles in my life. That is downright comical. I struggle just as bad as anybody else does, but I struggle with this in my pocket, and that's made all the difference. So I hope it makes a difference for you too. And with that, I will share my screen with our service presentation that we always use to conclude. And we can collectively reflect on universal well-being. May we abide in well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety. And may we maintain well-being in ourselves. May everyone abide in well-being, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety. And may they maintain well-being in themselves. May all beings be released from all suffering, and may they not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. When they act upon intention, all beings are the owners of their action and inherit its results. Their future is born from such action, companion to such action, and its results will be their home. All actions with intention be they skillful or harmful. Such acts, they will be the heirs. And as always, we will pay respect to the triple gem to conclude. Araham Sama Sambuddho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivademi Sawakato Bhagavata Dhammam Dhammam Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Sangham Namami. May you see your thirst clearly and quench it. And have a great week. I'll be here if anybody wants to talk anymore. I'm always happy to talk to them. Have a great day.
Thank you, Pete.
Here, have a good weekend, everybody.
Bye.